So somebody wanted to know how to set the engine mounting hole or hull bottom of question mark. Basically, what we're talking about here is how to mount an outboard engine bracket. Now, there's a lot of variables to this, and biggest thing is going to be what brackets you have and then the transom that you have. There's a lot of different manufacturers out there, but a lot of it goes mainly to the dead rise of the transom. So your transom is either going to be, a 5-degree dead rise, 10-degree, 12. There's a certain degree of an angle that you have with your transom. So that dead rise of that transom, or the angle of the transom, is going to play a very crucial part in this, because based on this is going to determine the bracket that you have. If you buy a used bracket that is not fit for that angle, then the angle of your bracket is then going to be built into that piece right there. If you've got a very large angle on the transom and you get an angle also with the bracket, it's going to put the bracket down like this, which is going to put your engine down into the water, which could potentially be a problem. Easiest way to do it is getting something like this, depending on the manufacturer of the bracket that you get. So this one is it's just a template. So like you can see here, it's going to be hard to see, but this is for a stainless marine, and it's basically the template. It gives you the different dimensions of how to measure it, and then we're going to talk about other things like the engine in just a second, but it tells you where exactly to measure based on the dead rise of the boat and the angle of the back of the boat, and then also whether you've got twins or you've got a single or whatever. And it actually tells you exactly how, angle of the bracket that you have. It's going to tell you exactly how to mount it. Now, something else when we're talking about, used stuff. So this is from Stainless Marine. You can call Stainless. They have those. You can get it from them. If you've got an Armstrong bracket, you can call Armstrong. They've all got that same type of template with the instructions on how to get the height correct. If you're putting used stuff together, that's a completely different story, because you might have to play with that. Like we were saying, if you got a large angle on the transom and your bracket doesn't have the right angle, because really, if you got a large angle on the transom, you need to have an up angle from the bracket, so that way it'll bring the engine up out of the water. Otherwise, it's going to be down the water, and you will need to mount that bracket higher than you normally would because of the angles matching up with the transom and the bracket. Otherwise, you could have a problem. And then, again, on the used stuff, depending on your engine. So do you have a 25-inch shaft engine? Do you have a 30-inch shaft engine? Those are all going to play crucial parts, because if you've got a 30-inch transom or a 30-inch drive shaft engine, then you're going to need that to be higher out of the water than if you've got a 25. So these all three of those things play a part in where exactly you want to mount that bracket. Dead rise of the boat, angle of the transom, angle of the bracket, and the length of the drive shaft of your outboard. And then, if you have twins or anything more than that. But I would suggest, if you're trying to do something like that, that you just call the brand, like either Armstrong or Stainless Marine, and then get the template that they have, and it comes with the instructions, and then you can find the angle of your transom, which is pretty easy. You just basically take a right angle and put that onto the boat, and then based on the distance it'll tell you exactly what degree you have. And then most brackets somewhere, I think it's usually close to where the anode is. So on the inside, when you look in the bracket where the anode bolts in, somewhere around there, I want to say that like I know Stainless does, they have a stamp in there, and that stamp is like a code to tell you what degree that bracket is. So that's, going to be, here's the top of the bracket, and then here's the angle of it. It's going to tell you what exactly that is. So it's very important to make sure that you look at those two things before you go mounting that thing up. And then again, it's a lot easier if you have the template, because you can mock it up on there, drill some pilot holes, check everything out before you just go sending, 15 holes that are a half-inch big through the transom into the boat, and find out that, oh no, it needs to be 2 inches higher that's going to be a big problem that you don't want to have to deal with if you would have just done the check in the first place. And again, if you're putting used stuff together, like a used bracket on a used boat with a used engine, and you have you have a 30-inch shaft engine and you need to bring it up, be thinking about later on, how long is this outboard going to last? Because if it's only going to last, a year or two, you might not want to even go through with mounting everything for that engine. It might be better for you to just sell that engine and find a 25 or something that is going to match that package better based on what you've got with all the used stuff. So take into account all of that and the later on, because buying a 30-inch or a 35-inch or something like that is going to be different than finding a 25. There's a lot more 25-inch shaft outboards out there for sale than there are 30s and 35s when you're buying used. When you're buying new, obviously you can buy whatever you want to buy. 35 is going to be more expensive because it's got more metal, and it's a bigger package, so it's usually a few $100s, if not $1,000 more for like a 30-inch compared to a 25, or a 25 compared to a 20. And then also something else to think about as far as putting all that stuff together and making sure that the height is right based on your template and the instructions from the manufacturer of your bracket, and the angle of your transom is that engine's how close is it to the water line? Because based on how far back the engine is, you can come up, because the water's going to, if this is the bottom of the boat, water's going to come off and then it's going to rise. There's two different things people say as a rule of thumb. Some say for every foot, you get a ½ inch of up. Some will say every foot you get an inch up. Which one's right? I'm not 100%. You can use either one. They're so close that it probably doesn't matter. But if you're, say, 2 feet off the back of the boat, which is most platform brackets are 24 inches far deep, I guess you would say. So you would get either an inch or 2 inches up of that mounting height, because that's where the water is going to come up and hit the lower unit of the outboard. Now, all of them have basically a static water line marking on the back, because there is an above the water exhaust for the outboard. And it's crucial to be thinking about this, because if you take this bracket and you want to put like a 20 or some 25s even, and you get that thing buried down deep enough in the water, when you come off plane, usually there's a wall of water that comes back whenever it comes off plane. That water comes over, and if you have the engine mounted so low that it's just smashing into the back of the cowling, that's not going to be a good thing, and it could be a problem with swamping the engine. So maybe you do need a 25 or you do need a 30-inch. That is kind of something to think about, as a 30-inch is going to have that static water line, that above the water exhaust higher from the water line than a 25 or a 20. So every one, is 5 inches. So a 20 to a 30, that's a 10-inch gap. So be thinking about that based on, again, angle of the transom and the angle of the bracket that you have. Working diligently is said, why not a Scott Atwater? It's talking about older outboards. Like I really do not have much experience with any of that. Like a Scott Atwater, I'm pretty sure that's an air-cooled engine, and it's a vintage engine from like the 50s. So I really don't know that much about those kinds of outboards. I mean, I've got some experience with like a Ted Williams and stuff like that, but some Sears, Roebucks, and some Chryslers. But some of that other vintage outboard stuff, I don't have that much experience with. So whether that is a reliable, unreliable engine, I don't really know. I mean, that's kind of what the discussion was about, was being unreliable versus reliable. And personally, I would say anything that's 40 years old, I would consider unreliable, because it's a vintage engine. Even though it may be a reliable engine for what you're using it for, like you're putting, one of these small outboards, these 2-strokes on a John boat, on a canoe or something like that, where you're putting around a lake, 100% reliable because it starts up and does what you want it to do. But by and large, when I say things like that. I'm talking about stuff that you're going to use every other day and be getting you back and forth. Like a lot of these little engines, people are using them on their dinghies. That's their daily commuter from a sailboat. Like if you live on a sailboat and you work in town, then you use your little engine as, that's your commuter. So I'm looking at it from that point of view, not the point of view of on 4 or 5 weekends out of the year, you fire up this 45-year-old outboard and go put around the pond. That's not really what I'm saying as far as it not being reliable, but I don't have that much experience with those older engines. A lot of them, once you get running, if you can keep them running, then they are reliable as far as like doing that kind of stuff with them. But if you're wanting to put them on a bigger lake and then go a distance, or if you need that to get from your sailboat to land to go to a job or something like that, I wouldn't consider something like that reliable. I think that is a vintage piece. It's an antique, and it should be, restored and cleaned up to where it's like people look at it and be like, oh, wow, that is really, really cool for a vintage antique outboard that's still running and someone's still using it. I'm all on board with you there. Hot shots. A year ago, I bought a boat with a 2003 HPDI. I thought, since been an auto mechanic for 30 years and love working on boats for a hobby, I figured I could take care of the HPDI and enjoy a very efficient two-stroke. I checked all the known problem items on the engine: mystery filters, VST pump and strainer, oil system, made sure the engine had all the updates. It was clear the engine had just been serviced before I got it, with all mystery filters and VST screen replaced. Well, I ran 2 successful trips, about 8 hours, and on the 3rd trip out, the engine blew up. Piston number 1 grenaded and piston 2 was somewhat damaged. I did a very detailed analysis during the teardown, checked the engine log, and did not find any cause for the damage by the pistons. It looked like it either overheated, which the log did not show, neither the engine temp gauge or detonation for unknown reason. Engine had 460-ish hours, so no, I will not ever run a 225 300 HPI ever again. I believe the disease they have is no knock sensor and no O2 sensor, and therefore they inherently run lean. That is unfortunate. The only 2 things that I can think of are going to be maybe an oiling problem or an injector problem that, made it run lean. So being on the 1 and 2 top 2 cylinders, it does use fuel to cool it, and it does need that oil lubrication from, that oil pump that has all those lines. A lot of times that the clips where those oil lines are and the fittings that are there can rust and corrode and clog up, and that be a problem. And so maybe it wasn't getting oil, but I think I saw a later comment where he said that it was not the oil and they were oiling properly, no problem there. So an injector, either the injector could have been messed up where it wasn't giving the right spray pattern or the right fuel, or there was a problem with the pump and you were not getting the right fuel pressure. Maybe there was not getting enough pressure at the top, or you had a leaky injector at the bottom, which was getting all the fuel, dumping it into the lower cylinders. Kind of hard to say what it could have been. I know you went through it quite a bit, so that's the first thing I would think of, is an injector not giving enough fuel, and then like you said, it's getting hot and detonating because it's not getting that fuel in there, and that's usually it. Yeah, no O2 sensor, no knock sensor. I mean, the OX66s had O2 sensors. I want to say some of the HPDIs had an O2, but I'm not 100% on that one. Kind of hard to all the different years that they made it, but no, I don't think that one did. So yeah, that's probably their problem in running lean. So they were super fuel efficient, but that fuel efficiency came with the running lean issue. And yeah, that's why a lot of them grenaded. So I do feel for you. That's unfortunate to have to learn the hard way about those HPDIs that, some people can get them to run good, and then other ones, they just blow up for, whatever reason. Jafar, what is your review on the Express brand? So Express brand, I really don't have any experience with an Express brand. So I know it's a bass boat, and I really don't have that much experience in the bass boating world either. I mean, I've worked on some Lows, some Lunds, Rangers. I haven't really done much with Triton or Nitro or any of these other. I've done quite a bit with Skeeters, but my bass boat experience is very limited. I normally have not been in a bass world, being in South Florida and now in Central Florida. It's all offshore stuff for me, so I don't really know much about Express. I mean, I haven't heard anything bad. I don't know too much about them, so I can't really give you any solid information about them. Filbert, love the videos. Thank you, sir. I have a question about a similar topic. Are there any of these budget brand boats that you think are actually putting out a good product? Honestly, it all depends on the brand. I think that it's hard to call out one brand from another brand and say, oh, this brand's really good or this brand's really not. Because if it's really not, I'm just not going to say anything about it, just because I can't be straight up bashing brands all the time and be like, well, that is a very bad boat, very poor brand, unless it's like a known issue where it's like, obviously this boat brand has a problem and they should fix it. And, otherwise I'm just going to get cease and desist all the time about, oh, you can't be bashing our brand. So can't really do that. But I think that the production line boat, which is what you're talking about, Makos and Crown Lines and all these other like production line budget boats that come in with an introductory price where you can get into boating of like, you're getting a boat, you're getting a trailer, say it's a 21-foot boat, a good engine package, decent electronics, and you're able to get on the water for like a reasonable price, being anywhere from, 30, 40, 50, 60, under $100,000, I would say. So the difference between that and like top line boats that cost $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for the same size, 21 to a 26-foot boat, then they do serve a good purpose. I think that by and large, most of the ones that are out there now, a lot of the like really dumpy brands have really, there's not too many of them left. Most of them have closed up shop because they made such a poor product. But by and large, most of the production line boats that are out there that you get from Bass Pro and these other major companies that are pumping out boats, they're not too bad. I'll probably have to circle back to this and do a little bit of research to give you some names of some brands, because I think that's what you're looking for. You're looking for some names of some brands. And as just off the top of my head, I can't think of any. So what I'll do is I'll just throw this question onto, next week or the following week. So that way I can get some brands together and say, oh, these are good. These are, to give you a list of maybe the top 10 decent budget brand boats that I could come up with. Hi, mate. How long will an impeller last? How often should you replace it? So an impeller, generally, most companies, it's either every 300 hours or every 2 years. That's basically what most brands out there, that's their intervals. Some will say 3 years, but it's usually 2 years, 300 hours generally. And, that's kind of a matter of opinion, because there's people up north that have been running the same impeller for over a decade. So the actual impeller breaking down and not being usable, the issue is that it's a rubber component, and over time between heat and cooling, the rubber gets hard. It loses its flex, and it will crack. It will not produce the same amount of flow for the water that you need it to produce. And so that's kind of the problem with it. But again, there's people that are running Evinrudes from 15, 20 years ago that have never changed the impeller, and the lower unit's going to come off tomorrow because it's so oily that everything will come apart. Freshwater use. Down in the saltwater, that is a very bad idea. You do not want to do that. You want to be able to take that lower unit off at least once every 2 years, because if not, then you're going to have a problem getting that lower unit off. So that is another reason. And if you take the lower unit off, a $20 impeller is, you might as well just replace it. If you're going to go through the trouble to drop the lower, go ahead and put the $20 impeller in there and call it a day. So I would say to go with the every 2 years or 300 hours, that would be what I would say to change your impellers, because you want to grease the bolts, you want to drop the lower, you want to be able to inspect stuff and see if you have a potential problem in the future based on what you find when you drop the lower unit and look at everything. I mean, that's kind of part of changing it. Not necessarily that the impeller just wears out, even though the rubber eventually does wear out, but that's also another side of why you want to change it within those intervals. RW Landscaping, what about yellowfin? So talking about good boats, unreliable versus reliable, boats that hold their value. Yellowfins, they do hold their value. I'm not the biggest yellowfin fan. I have worked on tons of yellowfins, and for me, I'm not the biggest fan, so I'm going to kind of leave it at that. They do hold their value. They do ride nice when they're new, and over time, I do know that they just got sold to, not even just, it was actually a little while ago they were sold, so it's not, a small brand. I think the same people that own Invincible bought them as well. I think they're going to hold their value. They have a good ride. The layout is very nice with the way they set them up with, with the setup for fishing, the lower gunnels. The flare is a nice flare on them. So I would say it's a nice boat. But again, I've worked on a lot of them, and I'm not the biggest fan of them. So I'm probably not the right person to ask that. That's just my opinion of them. And, like I said, it's still a nice boat. Doesn't make it a bad boat. Joey the Dime. It amazes me that boat salvages go far beyond auto salvage and recycling. Fiberglass can and should be recycled, as this is the most environmentally friendly option. Fiberglass hulls can be recycled by breaking the hull down and melting it to be used again in producing new products. Shredding the fiberglass is broken down into smaller pieces, often through shredding or grinding. Washing the shredded fiberglass is washed to remove any contaminants or impurities. Melting the clean fiberglass is melted down in a furnace or kiln. Molding. The melted fiberglass is poured into a mold and allowed to cool and harden. Finishing, the molded fiberglass is trimmed and finished as needed. Common uses: insulation. Recycled fiberglass can be used to make new insulation products. Automotive parts. Recycled fiberglass can make various automotive parts, including body panels, spoilers, and hoods. Boat building. Recycled fiberglass can be used to repair existing boats. Construction. Recycled fiberglass can make constructional elements such as beams, columns, and panels. Industrial products. Recycled fiberglass can make various industrial products, including tanks, pipes, and ducts. Yeah, I am surprised that there isn't more recycling done with boats. A lot of them do just go and rot in a yard. There's probably an issue with the amount of people that know how to recycle and the facilities that can actually recycle it, because you do have a lot of contaminants within a boat between the fuel tanks, the oiling systems, all of the resins, the metals, the T-tops, all the cushions, and all the other electronics. Like, there's a lot of stuff in them to strip them down. So I don't really know of that many places that are recycling them. But you're right. I mean, fiberglass could be used for fiberglass insulation and other stuff like that, and be maybe recycled a little bit better. I don't know. I personally don't know of any companies that do that. If you do, let us know. We'll definitely tell people about it, because it is something like you can see it with the salvage yards that we've went and looked at. I mean, they are, the hulls just pile up and they'll never get used. I mean, it would be 1 in 1,000 of the boats that land there ever get pulled out and used functionally ever again. I mean, most of them are just going to be there and that's it. So I don't really know much of the recycling aspect of older boats and stuff like that. I mean, it sounds like if that's the process, then 100% there should be a better way. It's just kind of like the same with lithium batteries and stuff like that. A lot of the batteries in the recycling facilities, they recycle all that material in order to make more batteries and stuff like that. So it does sound like a lucrative option and something that does need to get done. I don't know of any companies that do that. Sounds like it could be an opportunity for somebody, but appreciate it. Eric, I have 4 600 horsepower Mercury engines, and I am amazed there is no Garmin autopilot integration. How is this not common knowledge? I mean, it's kind of a little bit different, because the 600 is its own thing. Like, it is its own package. Like, it's super proprietary to Mercury. I mean, it's $100,000 outboard basically. So it is all inclusive. It's got a pod drive. The steering pump is built onto the engine, and so the way it functions is completely different than the way normal outboards function. Most of them have a steering cylinder on the front and then a steering pump in the boat, and it's run on hydraulics or electrohydraulics, being an electronic hydraulic pump that's helping assist, but still sort of hydraulic. As soon as we get into talking about fully electric systems like electronic, steering cylinders and electronic helms, a lot of that stuff becomes super proprietary to the brand. And Mercury has a deal with Simrad because Brunswick owns Mercury and they own Navico. So, it's kind of like a parent corporation umbrella type deal. And then Yamaha has a deal with Garmin. And so that's why those two work so well together, even though Garmin is probably the most user-friendly electronic out there. That's why a lot of people use Garmin, because it is so user-friendly, and some of the other brands have lacked in that department of getting their usability up as far as their products, even though, Garmin's not, I wouldn't say that Garmin is the be-all, best-all of the electronics world, but it's the most user-friendly, and pretty much anybody can use it. So the fact that they don't really talk that well with Mercury's, and then even more when you get into bigger stuff where you're using joysticks and stuff like that. So in the old days, an autopilot was just straight up controlling the steering. So you've got a GPS unit in the boat somewhere, and then that GPS unit uses a hub that then controls the steering pump to go either left or right and hold a course. Whereas now, most of the stuff is digital. So you've got digital steering, you got digital shift and digital throttle and all this other stuff. And so it becomes a little more complex. And now you've got brands that don't really talk to each other. So to get a Yamaha to talk to a Mercury and, a Suzuki to talk to a Honda, that kind of thing, that's really the problem, being a software issue, and that everything is become so electronic that it's its own deal. Not 100%. It's just unfortunate. I guess now that I think about it, I guess no, you wouldn't be able to do that because of the way it is and the way it's steered. The engine itself is controlling everything based on what it gets from the helm, because it is this fully electronic steering system on a pod drive. So to get another third party to be able to control that is everything's so new that just doesn't exist yet. The other thing is that the engine, in order to do autopilot, would only need a GPS. So as long as it's got GPS, then it's already going to have autopilot. And then I don't know so in order for a Mercury to talk to Garmin, it needs a SmartCraft gateway. Most of them, like if it's using a Simrad or a Lowrance, something like that, they have a VesselView link that allows it to talk to that through NEMA 2000. But when you talk about other third-party electronics, being Raymarine, Furuno, Garmin, Humminbird, not Humminbird, but those three mainly, it needs that gateway to talk to it. So whether or not you can get the controls for that onto the Garmin, I'm not 100% whether that is, possible or not possible, or possible in the future. Not really sure. So that's kind of just a breakdown of the differences between these different brands and the deals that they have between each other, and getting certain products to talk to other products. It's more of a software issue than it is necessarily a, functionality issue. It's just an integration, and not common knowledge is because everything's so new. And that's unfortunate that it is like that. And it's getting even worse because you've got other companies out there like C-Star and Optimus, which is a Dometic product, which Yamaha bought them. So now that is becoming proprietary. So that stuff no longer will work together, like the Optimus system that people would use for Mercury, like with the joystick and stuff. Those networks are no longer going to talk to each other. So that separation is going to even get farther apart because of the way the new next-gen DTS for Mercury operates, the way it talks to each other with the computers in the helm and the control boxes, and the way it talks to the engines, compared to the way that C-Star was tying into the network, the way it communicates is different now. And so I would say that integration is going to go away. And that's kind of the unfortunate deal of trying to integrate multiple different products with different packages. Unfortunately, yeah, you're going to run into that where a lot of people are going to be solely based on Simrad, or they want to use Furuno and they want to have a Yamaha engines, and the communication between them is not going to line up the greatest. You are going to have some integration obstacles to overcome there. So that's kind of a pickle that we're going to see based on what people are used to and what they want, and trying to put all this different stuff into one boat to make one super connected package as far as the boat goes. So Alib 90 Craigslist, older folks who don't use Facebook, list on there. I've gotten lucky on there talking about where you can find a cheaper boat to buy, or maybe get a deal on a boat. Yeah, Craigslist for sure. I don't know if I'd say it's just older folks who don't use Facebook, but you know, I'm 35. I'm not that old, so I mean, I was 18 when Facebook came out, so I don't even use Facebook anymore other than Marketplace. So Craigslist, older folks who don't use Facebook. Yeah, you can get lucky on Craigslist and find some deals on there for sure. So that's kind of one of the top places that I look when I'm starting to look around for a boat. I'm looking at, depending on the project that I'm trying to do, I'll look around and see if I can find one, you know, at a local dealer or in someone's yard or something like that. One that's been sitting. I like them that after they've been sitting, because like you can say, you can get lucky and find a deal. And then also Craigslist, Marketplace. It all depends on what exactly you're looking for. Also, another one is, you know, going somewhere where it's colder. So like, you know, somewhere that has a season, sometimes you can find a deal whenever you go to, like, you know, if I go to New York or something like that and try and find a boat in the off season when it's wintertime, there's probably a lot of stuff like that where you can find a deal based on it being a seasonality aspect, and people put their boats away, things happen, and they get rid of boats for cheap because it's the wintertime and no one else is buying it and they need to sell it. So you can find a deal like that. But most of the time, yeah, Craigslist, Facebook, stuff like that, you can find a cheap deal, get a good deal on a boat. And we'll go ahead and cut it off there for this week. If you want to talk about something, drop it in the comments below. Email us at askbab@bornagainboating.com. Also, we have a boaters program where we do weekly live streams. We got a podcast, hundreds of courses. If you want to check that out, go to bornagainboating.com, learn more about your boat, and we will see you next week.